Well, hello, guys, and welcome as we continue chatting through what it's like to lead during this season and during this COVID period. I have with me Fuzz and Carolyn Kitto, who are going to be sharing with us today a little bit about what it means to bounce forward from this period. What kind of questions should we be asking as leaders and as people in ministry with our young people, and how can we best lead during this season? So welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourselves, what you do with your week, and a fun fact?
We change from week to week because of the nature of what we do. So we lead we're national co-directors of Be Slavery Free, a charity NGO working at trying to stop slavery around the world. We're church consultants and youth ministry consultants. So that's what I do. And what do you do?
I do pretty much the same, but just at the moment I'm spending a lot of time on Zoom, and I'm also getting to spend more time in my veggie garden.
Excellent. Sounds
because I'm not traveling all the time.
Amazing. I think we're all spending a lot of time on Zoom, getting to know our friends over Zoom a lot.
Yep.
Guys, we might jump straight in. Could you share with us your thoughts on, a lot of people are saying that we're going to go back to normal. And as we chat particularly around ministry and meeting at church again, we're talking about going back to normal. However, I might say that things might change. What do you guys think about how we're going to come out of this period?
I posted up on Facebook a couple of weeks back a quote from David Mosley, which said, in the rush to get back to normal, take some time to reflect on what part of normal do you really need to rush to get back to. And I think it's a really, really good question. I had a phenomenal response on it. And I think that's really, really important. I don't think we're going to bounce back. Things are not going to be like they were before, and we don't want them to. This has been a phenomenal opportunity to actually hit the reset button and not bounce back, but actually bounce forward. And we want to not bounce back, but we want to bounce better. And our youth ministries, what we do in our leadership, needs to be better than what it was before. We've had an incredible period to reflect on that. And I think that the important thing is to gather up the imagination and the lives of the young people we're trying to serve and actually do some things, which is going to mean there's going to be some spark, some interest, and engender hope in what we are doing in our ministry, because it's about loving Jesus. It's about loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving our neighbors. We love ourselves. That's what Jesus talked about. How can we do that in fresh ways now as we go into the future to actually sort of get into presence, being with each other again? And I think that's the thing we've got to have for a start, of saying we're not going to go back to what we were. We're going to go better and go forward into more effective youth ministry and more effective ways of doing things. And maybe there's a great hope we could even be a better world coming out of this than what we were before, because things were not good beforehand. And we've got a real chance to hit the reset button.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, there's going to be so many global and social changes that come with this and through this. And I think for us on a small scale, as we think through leading our crews and our youth and our churches during this time, people are starting to ask a lot of questions, but there's probably some questions that are more helpful than others to ask. Have you guys got any insight into what questions we should be asking as leaders at the moment?
I think, first of all, and this probably carries on from what we were talking about before, and then Fuzz can go on and talk about some models for how we move on. But I think we also need to remember that Australia looks as though it's going to come out of this pretty well. As of today, when we're speaking, there's only been 100 deaths. But other places in the world are not going to come out of this as well, and they're not going to come out of this as fast. And we don't know if we're going to come out of it fast. You know, we might all start gathering and start spreading the virus, and different things might need to happen. So we have a number of friends that work in Africa, in some of the poorest countries in Africa, for example, and the virus is now in every country in Africa. Now, that just doesn't affect their health, which is probably less robust than ours anyhow. That's going to affect their food supplies. It's going to affect their water supplies. If you live in a house with 4 rooms and 2 or 3 families, socially isolating is not an option because you just can't do that in the space that you've got. So we need to be, I think, really mindful as we bounce out of this or bounce forward from this, that this has been a common human experience. It's affected every community that we know of in the world, and we need to keep that link of common humanity.
And we think there are 4 pandemics that have been happening at the same time here. Everybody thinks, oh my goodness, it's the health pandemic. You know, people are dying, catching this, etc. So there is a health pandemic, but there's also, excuse me, an economic pandemic. Now, never underestimate the power of economics and what economics does to us. We assume so many things because we've been brought up. Our young people assume so many things of this is what the world is like. The world that the world that as it has been in the last, say, 20 years, which is where most of our young people would have been brought up, was abnormal. And so we've got changes happening in those economics. It's not just about jobs. It's about having the resources to actually pull together to start to rebuild the sort of societies and the way we do things. And that's going to be different.
Because the virus has shown the cracks and the vulnerabilities.
And what's really come out of that has been the difference of if you are poor and don't have resources or if you are rich. And that's really come out so starkly, and that's been really, really looking at that. The other one is there's a supply chain pandemic. And that means that the things that we have come not automatically and magically within a shop, but they come through a whole lot of people and groups. And all of those stages of getting those goods to us have been affected by COVID-19, certainly affected by slavery potentials growing in each of those areas. But there's also how do we live with things which we may have less things than we had before because of this. And for the first time, people have become aware of the reality of supply chains and its effect on us. The 4th pandemic is a spiritual pandemic, and that people are starting to ask the questions, you know, so what is it all about? What's happening here? Now, all of those have biblical answers. All of those have God questions which will come up about how we live as individuals and how we live together as families, households, churches, societies, communities, etc. So this pandemic has really affected people of suddenly having a jolt of, hang on, I can't do and get and be. So who am I and whose am I? Now, a lot of times, one of the big pitfalls we fall into in youth ministry is we rely upon the social control of a youth group or of presence of being together and teaching, influencing, worshiping, etc. So what's happened here is we've not had that experience, and people have been driven back into their personal units. And going, oh, but I don't have that encouragement in the same way. I don't have that present. I don't have the hugs. I don't have the touch. I don't have the things which have really helped me to be who I am. So who am I? Whose am I? Becomes the deep spiritual question that I think we're seeing a pandemic in as well. So there are things that we do about that. And one of the important things as leaders is that we need to build in at least three areas. And we've got a biblical model for this, and that's the story of Nehemiah. So Babylon's come, they have conquered Judah and Israel, the 2 kingdoms. They've taken people away. Some are left behind. In the desperation, some break all the laws and they start marrying other people around them. And that's where we get the Samaritans that came out of that era. They're not pure people. And we see the consequences of that in the New Testament stories. And what we start to see is that there comes a time, and Nehemiah asks the emperor of Babylon, can I go back and rebuild the temple, rebuild Jerusalem? and he gets permission to do that. Miracle number one. Two, he goes back and he realizes if we're going to do this, we're bouncing forward and it's not the same. So it's the second temple period that comes out of the Bible, which is different than the first temple period. And he realized that there are characteristics. Now, there are characteristics that Nehemiah had to be able to rebound and to rebuild. And one, I think, of the important ones is courage. We need to have courage to think outside the box of not how do we do things, how do we now do things is the question that we ask. So we've had this opportunity. We've come out of a jolt. It's come back to sort of really understanding how vulnerable we are. So in that, how much do we need God? It's not just Jesus is my boyfriend, everything's fine and wonderful. It's like, what does it mean to have the resilience to bounce back because of God and with others that we share in bringing in what God wants?
And I think because the boundaries and the confines have been removed, it actually gives us an opportunity to take more risks. This is a time where, because some of them are removed, now some will take risks that are, you need to take wise risks, but some will take risks that are helpful. And in those risks, we will find the way forward. For example, the churches that have risked go online for their church services instead of just going, oh, well, ho hum, we have to close the doors, have had phenomenal responses. So will they go back? Well, I hope not, because they've actually connected with a whole community of people they weren't connecting with before.
So one of the most important things as we bounce forward is really to engage with our young people. We need more contact, more encouragement, more pastoral care, and more inviting them to come out into a new way with a new phase of faith and with a new connection with others in the youth ministry and engage with the world in new and fresh ways.
And in that, your attitude will be contagious. So the way that you're facing this, if you're just saying, oh, well, back to the program we designed at the beginning of the year, then people will follow that. But if people say, hey, we might have more opportunities to talk about our faith with our friends, or we might have opportunities to think about what's happening in the rest of the world and ways that we can serve and so on, people will follow your lead, because in these times, people look for leaders.
And I think the thing is, the more that we are able to help our young people to be able to connect and encourage and to care for their friends and others that are around, the more influence we're going to have to be able to share and be gospel. Because gospel means good news. So we can become good news in the way that we care and help our young people to care. So we model it, and then they model it to the others that they are connecting with and having relationships with. The second thing is empathy. Well, the third thing is empathy. And I can't count. She does the books. So empathy is really important. I read this great sort of description of empathy. It's the ability to recognize others' experiences as different from your own, but of equal significance and legitimacy.
It's good.
I'm going to read that again, because I think that is really, really important as a characteristic and a mode of operating, bouncing forward. It's the ability to recognize others' experiences as different from your own, but of equal significance and legitimacy. Now, that's what we do in pastoral care all the time. So in other words, learning to listen, tell me, how have you felt with this? What's come up for you? And to learn to ask the inviting, creative questions as we are pastorally caring more for our young people, to actually help them to be able to realize, oh my gosh, there are things I need to learn, grow in, do, etc., for me to actually get what I'm looking for the meaning for my life, which is what God gives to me, and we live out in those incredible ways. And of course, in all things, and are we up to the fifth one now, is it? Or the fourth?
Fourth.
Oh, good. And the fourth one is, what sort of culture are we going to create coming out of this in our youth ministry? Now, culture is really, really important. What's culture?
Culture is the invisible ways of living and interacting that make us who we are.
And it's what we do. It's the way we do things. The culture in our youth ministry is this, because that's the way that we do it. That's how God's led us. That's how God is shaping it. That's what we're working on developing all the time. So the culture is the most powerful thing that we have. And what God works through is the culture. So discipleship is, in fact, enculturating young people with the gospel. So this is who I am. Therefore, this is what I do. Because of whose I am, this is who I follow. This is therefore the ways that I will shape my life to be able to be followers of Jesus.
Good. Guys, I love it. It's amazing. I love the fact that all of this is wrapped up a lot in discipleship.
Yep.
So, having courage is having courage to lead well, to give more encouragement, more connection. As we're modeling as leaders, as we're being empathetic with the people around us, and as we're trying to build a culture, it's all largely around connecting with these young guys and bringing something to the table that says, guys, we're going to bounce forward together, we're going to take some risks, and God's still moving and still working, and that's exciting.
It is.
It really is exciting. There's an incredible opportunity that no one dreamed that we would ever have like this.
Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy. But God's at work and he's going to do great things. So,
in fact, Paul says in Philippians, God's always at work. Always at work to make us willing and able to do God's purposes. I love that.
So good. Guys, thank you so much for your time. I know this is going to be of huge value to all of us, as it has been for me. So thank you very, very much.
Great.
Pleasure.
Good
to be with you,
Bless
Peter.
everybody.
Bye.
Go for it.